Okay, I showed you earlier how to create a module that had a single function similar to this DNS underscore IP function. I showed you in the Python interpreter shell how you could import that function using both the from notation, so from my underscore module to import DNS IP, and also showing you the straight import notation, so just import my underscore module to. Now, what if we wanted to create a new program that used this function? So a different Python program than the one we originally created this function in. And we wanted to create this use module 2a. So this little program is going to import that code. So it imports my module 2. It then is going to use that function. So here's the first function call where we just use the default argument. Here's a second function call where it's going to use and pass in a different DNS server that it will print out. So if we go ahead and execute this, you're going to see that we print out the two DNS servers, i.e. we successfully called that function twice. Now what if we modified that slightly and used instead the from notation? So here you can see from my module 2, import DNS IP. Here's our first invocation. Here's our second invocation. Notice we did not have to prefix the names here with the my module 2 dot in front of these. So we could just reference it straight as DNS underscore IP in both cases. Once again, if we just execute this, you can see we get those two outputs, one for each call of that function. Okay, now what if we had a program, and let's see, and I wanted to actually do this one. What if we had a program that had both importable code and executable code? So here you can see I define a function, and I'm just creating a program. I'm doing something for whatever reason. I wanted to print out my DNS servers. Here I use this function. I print this message, and this all works fine. I can go ahead and say my module 3. I can go ahead and say, it'll go ahead and execute the code that I intended. But now we also know from our earlier discussions on Python that if I go ahead and say import my module 3, that what Python is going to do is execute all the lines in that function. So if I say import my module 3, we will have those print statements, those executions, those invocations of that function that happen in there will actually get executed. Now we could later, in here, we could still call that function. We could invoke it again ourselves as many times as we want. We could pass in arguments. All that would still work fine. But the key point that I wanted to make is that in this code here, whenever we import it, not only is this function definition going to happen, but this executable code is going to happen, because Python, when it imports, both in the import my module 3 and in the from my module 3 import DNS IP, in both those forms, it executes all the lines in the file. Now, that might be undesirable. We might want a way to separate importable code and executable code, such that if we execute this program, Python my module 3, it both defines the function and does whatever the program does. But then if we wanted to reuse this function or that set of functions in different programs, we'd have a way of doing that. So let's say we wanted to write a new program like this that imported my module 3 and then used that DNS IP function. So you can see here that I have an import statement and then I just have two invocations. But now notice what happens when I execute that. So we get 4 printouts happening. Why do we get 4 printouts? Well, because when we import this, it does the function definition, but then it also does all the other executable code. So it prints out these 2. And then we have the, actual printouts we wanted to do in this. So the bottom line of what I'm trying to say is in this module that we're creating, it would be really nice to have a way to separate things that are importable, things that could be used in other programs, from executable code. And Python provides us a way of doing that. So let's look at what Python's mechanism for doing that is. So you have potentially seen this before. Python has this, and let me make sure I'm looking where I want to look. So Python has this technique where it has if _name equals _main. So let me first just get rid of this and just show you the same exact code we had a minute ago. And I'm going to comment out that. All right, so this is pretty much exactly what we had a few minutes ago, except that I have this if condition. So I have my function getting defined, and then I have this if _name equals this string. So this is just a conditional. This is just a magic variable in Python. It just is a variable name that has 2 double underscores, the word name, and then 2 trailing double underscores. And it's just checking, does this variable equal this string? If it does, then this code down below here gets executed. So now let's go ahead and execute this. And what you're going to see is we see the printout. We see the 2 DNS servers get printed out. So you can see that what happens when Python executes this, goes down the file top to bottom. It sees the function, it defines the function, it gets here, and this is true in this case. And I'll show you, I'll prove to you it is true, but we know it's true because we did see these messages, these execution messages when we executed it. So this if statement is true in this case where we execute the program. And then we had our 2 function invocations. We got our 2 messages out to the screen. Now what happens when we import this? So if I import that file, now notice I did not see any strings come out. So if we look back at our program, well, we don't know if this happened. We'll see in a second if that function exists, but we know that this didn't execute. So we know that this didn't happen, so we know that this was false, and I'll prove that to you in a minute. Now let's just look at our dir on this file name and see, do we have the dns.ip function available to us? So dundername.dnsip is available to us. We can invoke it. We can call that function, and it operates properly. Okay, so Python gives us a way of separating executable code from importable code, and that way is this if dundername, so this if _name equals this string. So everything that's importable you should put above this line, so above that if statement. Everything that's executable should be below this line. And by executable, I mean that is in this particular program that's specific to the execution of this particular program. So now notice I changed my statements here. So I'm going to print out this variable, and I'll actually comment out the function. For now, we don't need it. So notice here I changed this code to be 2 print statements. One is going to say before the if statement, print out the variable value. The other one is going to be after the if statement, print out the value of that variable. Okay, so now let's go ahead and execute this. Python dundername. You see that when we execute this program directly using the Python interpreter, what Python sets that variable to is the _main string. Now, when we import this, what Python sets that variable to is actually just the name of the module itself. So here the name of the module is dunder_name. So you actually see that when we import it, that name variable gets set to just the name of the module itself. So if we go back to our code, the reason this works is in the executable context, i.e. when we go like this, when we say Python file name, that gets set to the _main string. So in that case, not only will everything that's above the if happen, in this case, this print statement, this function definition, but everything below the if would happen as well. So in this case, the second print statement and then the invocations of our function. On the opposite, on the other hand, when we import this, so if we import this name here, this variable is going to be equal to the file name. So in our case, this will be dunder_name, so this would be false. So that everything above here would get executed, right? Just as it always does when we import. Python goes from top to the bottom, starts executing this. This would happen, this would happen, this would happen. It would get here, that if statement would be false, nothing else below that would happen. So the key point I'm trying to make is we're making a dividing line between importable code, things we want to be able to reuse in different programs, and executable code that is specific to this one program, specific to the purpose that we're creating this file for. The reason that I bring this up is a lot of times when you're writing code, especially early on, you'll just be writing your code that's accomplishing some purpose, but you'll maybe make functions, you'll maybe make classes, you'll maybe make methods, and you'll realize across time, oh, hey, I made this function that does X, Y, and Z. I could reuse that function in a different program. But in order to reuse it in a different program, you need to structure your code in such a way that it's isolated enough from, the original program, that it's separated enough from the original program that you are creating such that it can be reused. And this if _name is going to be the mechanism that's going to enable you to do that.